The Russian Federation continues to intensify its pressure in a bid to prop up its faltering invasion of Ukraine. President Putin issues orders launching unmanned aerial vehicles, but not all these drones are aimed solely at Ukraine. A significant number end up in the airspace of NATO member states, representing just one facet of Russia's hybrid warfare strategy. Eastern European countries, weary of this aggression, have voiced their discontent. Putin has crossed a red line, and active preparations for confrontation are now underway. New alliances are forming, strategic plans are being developed, and the message to Putin is unequivocal: leave Europe, or face defeat. Notably, the country delivering this message most forcefully is Bulgaria. On the 7th of March this year, news spread worldwide about yet another incursion of a Russian drone into European airspace, this time targeting Sofia, Bulgaria's capital. Vasil-Levski Airport was forced to temporarily suspend operations after security systems detected a drone hovering dangerously close to the airport. Bulgarian authorities reacted immediately. Air traffic control and the border police coordinated to reroute flights and ensure the safety of everyone at the airport. The incident was brief, and the drone was swiftly neutralized. Although Bulgaria was initially reluctant to speculate publicly about the drone's origin, and some experts even suggested it might be of Iranian manufacture, capable of traversing such a long distance, the true culprit is clear. Russia appears to be resorting once again to such provocations, and Bulgaria has no intention of ignoring this latest intrusion. Authorities recognize that the early March incident is merely the tip of an iceberg, a much deeper and longer-running hybrid warfare strategy that many in Europe prefer to overlook. The reality is that Russia is already at war with Europe, albeit not through conventional means. Bulgaria has become its latest victim, and we will examine Russia's hybrid strategy in greater detail shortly. Before delving into the specifics of that strategy, however, it is essential to consider Bulgaria's response. The country has taken far more significant steps than merely closing its airport for a few hours. Following the drone incursion, Bulgaria has actively forged new alliances and strengthened its position. Still wary of possible Iranian involvement, it announced enhanced cooperation with Greece, a fellow NATO ally and another Eastern Front nation well aware of the dangers of hybrid warfare. At Sofia's direct request, Greece will now deploy F-16 fighter jets and Patriot air defense systems on its territory to protect the airspace of its northern neighbor. Bulgaria has also reaffirmed its support for the Pearl Initiative, through which EU and NATO members can procure weapons from the United States for Ukraine's use in defending its territory against Russia. We are witnessing a nation, shaken by recent events, spring into action, and it is here that its response becomes truly consequential. Beyond reconfirming its commitment to Pearl, Bulgaria has sent Putin a clear message: his hybrid warfare tactics are not only failing to intimidate Bulgaria but are provoking the exact opposite reaction from what he intended. Instead of panic or retreat, Bulgaria has signed a 10-year defense agreement with Ukraine. Announced on the 30th of March, this pact, Bulgaria being, as Le Monde notes, a major arms producer, establishes cooperation between the two countries in the production of drones and other military equipment. Joint manufacturing will take place on both Bulgarian and Ukrainian soil, as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed. The decade-long duration is designed to allow both nations to fully systematize their approach. But it also sends a powerful signal to Putin: Bulgaria firmly believes in Ukraine's long-term sovereignty, and for that to endure, Russia must be defeated in Ukraine. Putin now watches as a former Soviet state responds to his hybrid warfare strategy not by distancing itself from Ukraine, but by deepening ties with the very country Russia wants Bulgaria to avoid. Defense companies will form partnerships, cooperation will occur at the governmental level. Russia and its allies assumed that sending a drone over Sofia would sow division and fear. Instead, Putin has inadvertently catalyzed a new, stronger alliance directed squarely against Russia, a development Europe and NATO urgently need. The drone over Sofia is just one of many examples of how Russia is waging war against Europe. The Center for European Policy Analysis, CEPA, in its 31st of March report, described the current situation across Europe as a shadow war with no end in sight. As the report states, Europe is no longer merely a witness to the war in Ukraine or isolated acts of Russian aggression, it has become the target of a systematic shadow campaign. Russia is attempting to dismantle Europe's institutional fabric and sow chaos in countries it perceives as posing the greatest threat to Putin's ambition of resurrecting a new Russian empire. Unlike in Ukraine, Russian troops are not invading, and missiles are not raining down on European cities. Instead, sabotage, surveillance, cybercrime, and aerial incursions are the weapons of this shadow war, a conflict Russia has been waging since at least 2022, and to which Europe must urgently awaken. This ongoing escalation has transformed Russia's previously fragmented tactics into a cohesive strategy. Russia exploits traditional European deterrence models, which assume adversaries weigh risks and adjust behavior in response to potential punishment. But Russia is not such an adversary. As SIPA notes, Russian intelligence and security services are rewarded for initiative, not restraint. Operations do not need to achieve specific strategic objectives to be approved, they merely need to demonstrate activity. This poses a fundamental problem for Europe. Its deterrence mechanisms fail to sufficiently penalize Russian escalation, allowing the shadow war to continue unchecked. The result is a one-sided, non-traditional conflict in which Europe is consistently on the losing end. Bulgaria clearly understands the gravity of this situation, having recently witnessed Russian strategic activity firsthand in Sofia. In response, it is taking decisive steps to bolster its defenses against aerial threats and has signed agreements with Ukraine aimed ultimately at strengthening the traditional European front against Vladimir Putin's aggressive policies. Yet for Russia, this shadow war is a multifaceted strategy comprising four main categories of attack, each significantly intensified since Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began. These categories are proxy forces and infiltration, attacks on undersea and energy infrastructure, aerial incursions, and cyber operations. Together, they form the spearhead of Russia's shadow war, and the recent drone incursion into Bulgarian airspace is merely the visible tip of a vast iceberg that Europe must begin to melt. Let us first examine the tactic of proxy forces and infiltration. Right under the noses of European governments, Russia has built an extensive network of proxy organizations and criminal enterprises operating within EU territory. Arson, sabotage, intimidation, and covert surveillance constitute the arsenal of these proxy groups, and it has proven strikingly effective. By using third-party actors, Russia maintains plausible deniability while still advancing its strategic goals. This renders Europe's traditional deterrence model, mentioned earlier, entirely ineffective. How can one deter an adversary that refuses to play by the established rules of warfare? Examples of this proxy and infiltration approach abound. Chatham House reports cases in the UK of individuals allegedly working for Russian intelligence. In Germany, suspects have been arrested for allegedly planning attacks on Russia's behalf. A series of train derailments in Sweden shows clear Russian fingerprints. And in Estonia, a key component of NATO's Eastern Shield against Russia, security services report intense efforts by Russian operatives to recruit local citizens, likely to build a force capable of attacking the government from within. All of this constitutes Russia's attempt to exhaust Europe as a collective entity. Sabotage by proxies, infiltrators, and defectors is designed to sow discord and chaos in target countries, and it often succeeds. Even now, in Bulgaria, a pro-Russian faction is condemning the newly signed agreement with Ukraine. Pro-Kremlin parties are likely using this pact as a campaign platform ahead of parliamentary elections scheduled for the 19th of April. Putin's manipulations here are obvious, and such internal divisions are one reason why Russian subversive operations across Europe have quadrupled in 2024. Turning to sabotage, Russia has also focused its shadow war on some of Europe's most critical undersea infrastructure. This is the second pillar of Russia's four-part shadow war strategy, and the one we will emphasize here. SIPA notes that undersea cables and other energy infrastructure targeted by Russia across Europe are vulnerable precisely because they are vital to both civilian and military life. Once again, Russia's approach in Europe differs from its tactics in Ukraine. Missiles and drones do not strike power plants. Instead, Russia exploits maritime and oceanic gaps in Europe's defenses to disrupt communications and create confusion within military structures across the continent. Vessels, sometimes Russian-owned, sometimes disguised as innocuous civilian ships, have been observed near the extensive undersea cable networks that keep Europe functioning. By the 7th of April, 2025, at least 2 incidents of undersea sabotage had occurred in the Gulf of Finland over the preceding 18 months. NATO's eastern flank is once again under assault. The Baltic Sea has become an even more significant target, according to Politico. Between 2022 and April 2025, 6 suspected sabotage incidents occurred in these waters, and since 2023, 11 known undersea cables have been severed or otherwise damaged. As with its proxy and infiltration tactics, Russia conducts these operations in a way that ensures plausible deniability. Everyone, especially in Eastern Europe, knows who is behind these acts of undersea sabotage. But without irrefutable proof, and given the uncertainty about how far Russia can go before crossing into conventional warfare, meaningful retaliation remains elusive. Russia is probing the communication and energy vulnerabilities in Europe's undersea cable empire, and simultaneously testing limits in the skies. The drone that entered Sofia's airspace is just one of numerous instances in which Russian assets have apparently violated NATO airspace to sow chaos. Often, the timing of these incursions suggests Putin is deliberately taunting NATO, likely because he is confident no immediate counterstrikes against Russian territory will follow. For example, on the 12th of September, 2025, Operation Eastern Sentry was announced following a Russian drone incursion into Poland. Yet less than 24 hours later, another Russian drone entered Romanian airspace. Within a week, 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets violated Estonian airspace, lingering for 12 minutes and deliberately ignoring all identification requests until NATO scrambled jets to escort them away from the eastern flank. Since then, Belarusian weather balloons have floated over Lithuania, Russian drones have breached US military bases in Estonia, and more. According to The Conversation, Russian aerial assets tested NATO airspace 18 times in 2025 alone, 3 times the number recorded in 2024. The latest drone over Bulgaria appears to signal that Putin has no intention of abandoning this third pillar of Russia's shadow war anytime soon. Why would he? From his perspective, Russia is largely getting away with it. Finally, cyber operations cannot be ignored. The evolution of Russian cyber attacks warrants special attention. While early efforts targeted general information technology, they have since become more precise, focusing on critical operational systems such as energy grids and transportation networks. Disinformation, meanwhile, remains a cornerstone of Russia's cyber arsenal. By flooding social media with armies of bots and fake accounts, Russia manipulates the perceptions of millions who rely on these platforms for news, thereby influencing elections and shaping public opinion far beyond its borders. Paradoxically, while Russia aggressively uses the open internet to export Vladimir Putin's narrative abroad, it severely restricts domestic access to it. Research from King's College London vividly illustrates the scale of these cyber efforts, confirming that the shadow war is being fought not only in the skies and seas, but deep within the digital fabric of European society. According to the college's data, 505 incidents related to foreign information manipulation and interference were recorded between November 2023 and November 2024. These incidents affected 25 different platforms, spanned 90 countries, impacted 322 organizations, reached 38,000 channels, and generated 68,000 pieces of content. Among the hardest-hit countries were Ukraine, Germany, France, and Moldova. These social media operations clearly demonstrate that Russia's cyber warfare extends far beyond attempts to disable systems. The true objective is shaping public opinion. Once again, the word division comes to the fore. Through its cyber campaigns, Russia inflicts direct damage on its targets by fostering precisely the kind of polarized political climate now evident in countries like the United States and the United Kingdom. Europe is, of course, attempting to push back on this front. In December 2025, the European Council announced sanctions against 2 organizations and 12 individuals linked to information manipulation and cyber attacks. While these are significant steps, their scale falls far short of what is needed to effectively counter Russian cyber exploits, a serious problem for Europe. As Russia wages its shadow war, many Europeans remain either unaware of what is happening or fundamentally misunderstand its nature. Across numerous European countries, acts of sabotage and cybercrime attributed to Russia are often treated solely within criminal and civil legal frameworks. For instance, cable sabotage is frequently dismissed as maritime accidents. Vladimir Putin is fully aware of this, enabling Russia to act with impunity on the hybrid warfare front. Russia's actions are not perceived as repeated acts of war but rather as isolated crimes for which, Moscow claims, it cannot be held accountable, leaving observers feeling helpless. Even on the conventional military front, it is evident that the EU and NATO are not doing enough to deter Russia. According to Euromaidan Press, Bruno Kohl, head of Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, has warned of a possible Russian attack on a NATO country by the late 2020s. Similar warnings have come from other senior officials, including Carsten Brewer, Germany's Inspector General of the Armed Forces. Across Europe, voices are rising that traditional deterrence is failing, yet Europe remains unprepared for the possibility that this shadow war could escalate into open conflict. Euromaidan Press reports that Europe may not be ready until 2035, at best, 5 years after many NATO generals predict a potential Russian offensive. At least some parts of the continent will not be ready. However, on Europe's eastern flank, preparations are accelerating. Bulgaria serves as a prime example. It is now seeking defense cooperation with Greece and Ukraine to counter the looming Russian threat. According to RFU News, several other European countries are following suit. For over 4 years, Ukraine has been successfully defending itself against the very campaign Vladimir Putin may intend to replicate across Europe. During this time, Ukraine has significantly strengthened its defense industrial base, developing a range of advanced counter-drone technologies, including interceptor drones and electronic warfare systems. Bulgaria will now gain access to these capabilities. The same applies to Denmark, Finland, and Latvia, which have signed partnership agreements with Ukraine under the Build for Ukraine initiative. This marks the integration of Ukrainian know-how into Eastern Europe, a development that could prove to be the ideal countermeasure to Putin's shadow war. Russia's strategy of division is instead fostering unity, at least in Eastern and Nordic Europe, making it the perfect antidote to Moscow's actions. Preparations for war are already well underway across many eastern territories. Bulgaria has only recently grasped the full gravity of the Russian threat and is now actively preparing. In Latvia, a NATO battle group centered on a German brigade is being formed and is expected to be fully operational by 2027. Poland, meanwhile, has emerged as one of Europe's strongest military powers. In 2025, it allocated 4.5% of its GDP to defense, the highest share among all NATO members, with 54% of its defense budget dedicated to weapons production rather than personnel costs or overhead. All 3 Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, are heavily investing in border defense, following Poland's lead. What we are witnessing are the seeds being sown in Eastern Europe. While much of the continent hesitates, delays, and remains uncertain how to respond to the shadow war, even as generals sound the alarm about Russia's further aggressive plans, countries like Bulgaria, Poland, the Baltic states, and Greece are preparing for what they see as inevitable. Bulgaria, in particular, is relying on its neighbor for defense support, and cooperation between these nations and Ukraine has reached unprecedented levels. Defensive infrastructure is being built, and the warning signs of hybrid warfare are being taken with utmost seriousness. Eastern Europe is aligning itself with Ukraine, and sending a clear message to Vladimir Putin: his shadow war will not intimidate them. They are ready to fight, and by standing together with Ukraine, they are prepared to crush Russia's leader and his imperial ambitions. Of course, all of this assumes that Russia will even retain an army capable of turning its shadow war into a full-scale invasion, a far from certain prospect. Tens of thousands of Vladimir Putin soldiers are dying daily in Ukraine. Something is decimating Russian forces at an unprecedented rate, casting serious doubt on the success of any spring offensive meant to topple a country that shows no signs of buckling under Russian pressure.